Annabelle knew if she was going to win hearts and minds and earn any rank of importance among the Lost Boys, she had to get things right from the very beginning. Begging for only a chance to prove herself would never work. She had to make that chance herself, then reach out and grab it. That was what she must do and would do. And fortunately for her, she had armed herself for the purpose. Fetch sniffed the air and found it disappointingly unsavory. Come to that, there was no flame flickering in the kitchen. The bowls stood filthy on the counter in a pile up to the ceiling, and Annabelle, well, she was nowhere to be seen. He glanced around. The place really was a wreck. Hook kept a tidier ship, and he was a pirate. Where had Annabelle gotten to? And why hadn't she stayed behind and cleaned up the hideout? Goodness knows it needed it. He poked his head outside again, where the Lost Boys were trailing up the path, faces worn and the rumbling of empty bellies almost audible in his ears. They were hungry again. Feeding a bunch of boys was a lot of work. Rowing or not, they were hungry. He was hungry, and the growling in his belly was very much cutting into the beauty of carefree boyhood daydreams and adventures. It was almost as if never was changing, and he couldn't wonder too much about that, with Peter having disappeared behind the pixies, and then a human girl falling into the sea of dreams. Not that it had never happened, but never without Peter escorting them. And this one is a girl to be reckoned with. Like a whirling dervish, chasing everybody around and throwing everything into chaos. Fetch chuckled to himself because, if he were honest, he would have it no other way. Annabelle waited until Fetch emerged from his hideout and saw the weary boys filing down the path. Then she cleared her throat and crowed, "Look at these beauties I've caught, ready for the pan." She stood at the top of the rise, above the hideout hollow, and came bouncing down the pathway. And the others turned in unison to stare, frowning at the sound of her rather too jovial chant in their ears. The yellow dress and the apron had been stowed away, and the girl they had wrestled from the mermaid's grasp was dressed in an undershirt and a pair of borrowed breeches, looking like one of the Lost Boys herself. But when they saw the half-dozen trout she held strung from their gills on a line, all hostility vanished. "Good lot you got there. I say, do you have plans for them?" The tallest and skinniest of the Lost Boys called that. Annabelle laughed and dangled the line in front of them. "I intend to fry them up and share them around as soon as I recruit chef." The boys glanced at Fetch, who hesitated, then nodded. They went to the task of cleaning the fish and building fire. And Annabelle watched and assisted here and there, taking an interest in the cooking lesson, but not too active an interest. After dinner, Annabelle caught a stern look and a jerk of the head from Fetch. Licking her slightly greasy fingers, she sidled up beside him. Fetch cleared his throat. "What exactly are you wearing?" Annabelle fingered the pair of breeches she had borrowed. "What, these?" "Yeah, those." "Whose are those breeches?" "What? Harsh stuff? No, I've never seen them before today." "No doubt you have. So maybe you tell me. Whose are they?" Fetch sniffed. "Mine." Annabelle waved her hands. "I'm not stealing them, if that's what you're worried about. I even paid rent for them. They had a hole in the gusset you could put your hand through before I sewed them shut." "I'll thank you to—" Fetch stopped, obviously uneasy about asking a girl to strip off her breeches then and there. He stared back at her. "That's a nice thank you for driving you out of the lagoon to steal a fellow's breeches." Fetch leaned back against the tree's roots, then cocked a curious and slightly sulky eye at Annabelle. "I don't suppose you can say how long he's rented them for." "I don't suppose I can," Annabelle said, staring at the red embers of the fire. "You wouldn't have me spoil my new wife apron, fishing and all manner of adventure." "I didn't think—" He paused. "How did you fish all those trout out of the lagoon? I've never seen anyone make such a catch." Annabelle shrugged and smiled. In fact, she hadn't made the catch either. She'd simply spoken to the mermaids. When she'd asked them for help getting something to eat, they'd been happy to oblige with the fish. Annabelle didn't tuck the Lost Boys into their beds, nor kiss them good night. She didn't force them to brush their teeth, nor to put away their laundry, even though the salt smelled worse than moldy cheese and fish guts. She stifled her gag reflex and rifled through the closet for her apron. It had to be done. Bedtime stories were too important to be neglected. She loved fairy stories herself, and even though she had very few in her lifetime, this particular story was a good one, and she read it well. And by the time she'd finished the first chapter and promised them more tomorrow, she was well on her way to having the Lost Boys wrapped around her finger. Fetch, though, Fetch was a different matter.